Hi everybody, this is Dan Stolberger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East Update. It is the week of July 24th, and let's take a look at what's going on in the Middle East this week. About 2/3, by the way, this is our news bites, and remember, you can get the PDF PowerPoint at our website at holygroundexplorations.com, or on this YouTube, I think there should be a link that you can just click. Make sure you get that because it really does accompany this video. So, news bites. Polls indicate that around 2/3 of the US voters describe themselves as pro-Israel and oppose any kind of reduction of American security aid to the Jewish state. That's good news. Israel supposedly, allegedly, hit Iranian bases near Damascus. Among the casualties were members of Hezbollah, as well as the Iranian Quds Force. Now, sabers are rattling and threats are being made because of this incursion. Twitter made a statement last week that the Star of David has now been deemed as, quote, hateful imagery. They received such a backlash of information that they reversed their position on this, but they shut down many accounts last week if you had a Star of David on your masthead or whatever. And that's been changed, but once again, it's an indication of the rise of anti-Semitism that we constantly talk about. Trouble brewing for Israel. Omar, Ellison, the whole squad are endorsing Biden and pushing for what they call a million Muslim vote. I wonder where those votes will go. And the squad member, however, Rashida Tlaib, may be vulnerable in a very tough primary that she's involved in right now. And then finally, California school boards are in the process of adopting a curriculum that has been accused of promoting radical anti-Israel content. So when we talk about Twitter, we talk about the rise of anti-Semitism. We know from experience in Israel that if you want to fight terrorism, it begins in the classroom. It begins in the elementary school classrooms. So this is not good news. Okay, let's go into our main articles this week. Iran versus Israel. As you know, there's been a series now of over 10 weird sort of explosions in Iran, and the Iranis are accusing both America and Israel, of course. And so there were 2 cyber attacks that were carried out against Israeli water infrastructure in the last week. One attack targeted the agricultural water pumps in the Upper Galilee, while the other struck an infrastructure in the center of the country. I know where these places are at, so I have that visual in my mind. But meanwhile, they were thwarted. But meanwhile, another explosion was reported at a power station in central Iran. Once again, very close in the region of the Natanz nuclear facility. And so it seems tit for tat. You're going to do this, we're going to do that. Unfortunately for the Iranians, or maybe fortunately for the Israelis seem to be more successful in this skirmish. But the threats continue, not just to Israel, but we'll see later here what the Iranians are saying about the United States. There's a new COVID Czar in Israel. As we know, we're going to talk a little bit about COVID here. It is Balagan. It drives you crazy. You don't know what's true. But as I read his report, it gave me a glimpse or some hope. I still think we're not going to know anything until after the November elections, but that's another subject for another time. But the new COVID czar in Israel is Ronnie Gamzu. And his quote is, "I believe we can defeat this pandemic even without lockdowns." He says, "No countries have managed to defeat the virus without a shutdown while it's spreading through communities, but I believe that Israel can do it." You know, we'll see here in a moment that there's been riots in Jerusalem, but what's coming out now, which I'm going to keep my eye on, is this sense of, hey, it's time to circle the wagons. We can all, you know, you've heard the phrase, where there are two Jews or three opinions, and their violence is breaking out, but it seems like there's a call that's going out that's saying, as Jews, we need to circle the wagons, and we need to be Israelis, and we need to fight this thing together. So we'll see how that transpires. There is some good news. The coronavirus restrictions are working. There is a cause for optimism in Israel. Hospitals could be over the worst in a few weeks. This comes from a Hebrew University statistical team that's concluded that the numbers are still high, but the trends are encouraging, that we shouldn't have to have a new lockdown. And then it talks about something that, of course, we at Holy Ground are very interested in: restrictions preventing foreign visitors from entering the country due to the coronavirus pandemic will extend until the beginning of September. This comes from the Israel Airport Authority. And we know this for a fact. Last week, Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz made the comment saying, the biggest impact on our economy by the virus to date is the limitation of international air travel, and the reopening of Israeli skies is a top priority for us. And so, again, we have a couple tours. You can check them out in the end of October, November time, and we're still praying that those tours actually are able to make their way to Israel without any sort of fear or quarantine. I mentioned that there's anarchy in Jerusalem. There are those pundits behind the scenes that saying that these riots are a clear input from America. Their goal is to break apart the Israeli society, topple Netanyahu, in hopes that either a left-wing politician comes into power in Israel, or Israel just becomes destabilized. It's not hard to see the blueprint of what's happening now in Israel as we look at what's taken place here in the United States. There's no doubt that Israel is facing serious economic stress, and the realization that while Netanyahu may have led the Israel into unprecedented success, his moves during this period have led to bitterness and chaos more than ever before. And this has caused foreign elements to be able to take control and cause and do even more damage. Of course, with all this taking place, we should hear something from the Palestinians. It's again Palestinian libel. Since the beginning of COVID-19, since the beginning of the pandemic, the PA has inverted reality. They consistently blame Israel for the spread of the virus. Recently, just this week, they made the statement that Israel is striving to spread the virus via the invasion of soldiers, the IDF. They get them sick with the virus, and then they send them into Palestinian homes, mixing with civilians and prisoners. So once again, got a problem? Blame the Jews. China and the Palestinians, this is a concern. Chinese President Xi Jinping called the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on Monday to voice his support for the creation of a Palestinian state. Palestine is the core, this is his quote, the core issue of the Middle East, and it's an issue that touches on the stability of the region. The two-state solution is the right direction, and the two sides need to stick together to dialogue negotiations on an equal footing. So right when we have the quartet, and then we have, of course, the Trump peace plan, China is wanting to be involved in this process also. Something to be concerned about. And then we've talked about war. Previously, we talked about wartime in Israel is usually summertime. And there's been major threats once again from Hezbollah in the north, and the IDF on Thursday was sending additional troops to reinforce the northern border with Lebanon. Again, as we mentioned, outside of Damascus, there was some explosions, supposedly from the Israelis, that killed 5 combatants, members of Al-Quds, Iranians, as well as Hezbollah. And so there is some concern that there will be a major incursion in the north, and Israel's preparing themselves. And then, as we mentioned, threats to the U.S. from Iran. The Ayatollah is warning the U.S. that they're going to have a comeuppance, as he put it, because of the death of Soleimani. And his quote is that we will definitely strike a reciprocal blow to the U.S. So will that threat be unanswered, or is there something in the works? One more thing and we'll be done for this week. There's an article that we'll talk about a bit next week, China versus Trump. The Wuhan virus, it was China's tool to take down Trump. As we've said before, this whole thing is just Polygon. It's a crazy maker. When November happens here in the States, I think we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. And it seems like behind the scenes of this coronavirus, once again, as we focus in, could it simply be China, who Trump stood up to, as you know, basically said, we got to get rid of this guy, and thus we have the coronavirus. With that, out of time for this week. God bless you. I hope you tune in next week. I hope you share this with your friends. Get your friends to sign up for KFIR. You can go to our website, Holy Ground Explorations, and sign them up. God bless. Shalom.